Welcome to My Life Chassidus Applied, episode 583. This will be a special edition, Purim and Persia, then and now. First and foremost, our hearts, our souls, our prayers go out to all the men, women, and children in Eretz Yisrael that are right now hunkering down in shelters to protect themselves from the retaliatory attacks from Iran. Rahman al-Islam, there have been nefashos, there have been people who've been killed. So Hashem should protect them all. There should be no more deaths and no more casualties. Hine leyonim v'layishan shemi Yisrael. The guardian of Israel does not sleep or slumber, as we shall be discussing the context of the Megillah B'layla Hu Nodat Shnas HaMelech, that night, the night of Golus, the king woke up from his sleep. Layonav v'layishan Shem Yisrael. So God should protect them all, especially being that Eretz Yisrael is Eretz Asher Eini Hashem Elokecha Ba, Bereshis Hashana Vad Achri Shana, a land where God's providence and eyes are there, more than anywhere else. Hashgacha Pratis is everywhere, but especially in Eretz Yisrael, every moment. So Hashem should protect them all, especially protect the military of the Tzahal, Tzava Hagana Yisrael, the IDF, or Moisa Nefesh, and protect as well the other military of the United States that together with Israel has taken preemptive measures against an enemy, a terrorist enemy, that has called for the destruction of Israel. And the goal, of course, is to eradicate the enemy in every possible way, exactly as it happened in Persia 2,400 years ago in the story of Purim. And above all, what happens afterwards, that it should bring up a stage and an era, a permanent era of Messianic, of the Mashiach, time of total shalom, permanent and sustainable peace for all people of this earth. Now, as I said, our hearts begin by talking about the pain and the losses, even one nefesh, especially more than one. And the days, the Derech HaTeva seems is going to be challenging. And yet, at the same time, the Eibush is going to help, and we'll finish this as soon as possible. It's obvious in a program called My Life Chassidus Applied, perspective of my life, of our lives, and applying Torah and Chassidus, that we have to address this without even question. First of all, the timeliness of it. Secondly, the connection to Purim, undeniable. Hashgacha Pratis, that this launch of what Eretz Yisrael is calling Operation Roaring Lion, Aryeh Shog Mila Yira, which follows what happened last June, was the operation called Rising Lion, Hein Om Kilovi Yokum. America called it Epic Fury, the American name of the operation. Happening when? It began on Shabbos, Parsha Zocher, Yud Aleph Adar, when Megillah Nikraz be Yud Aleph. We begin reading the Megillah according to the Mishnah already in the day of Yud Aleph of the month. Shabbos Zocher, why Zocher? Because the Shabbos before Mechias Haman, Mechias Amalek, is the zikaron of remembering that we have to erase and eradicate Amalek. And all around, as I said, Persia of old and Persia, modern day Persia, which is Iran. So it vartzach in the eigen, as the expression goes. It's obvious the hashgacha eliyena of this, and thus this program dedicated to these parallels. Above all, what we can do, the lessons learned. So again, we are absolutely praying for the end of any type of violence, any type of bloodshed, anyone being hurt. But unfortunately, when you're dealing with a Haman of our times, you have to do what you have to do. So many questions have come into My Life Chassidus Applied, chassidusapplied.com, where you have a forum. You can submit any question anonymously. Nothing is taboo, nothing is off limits. Might as well announce that right now. The program is dedicated, as I said, to all the men, women, and children in Eretz Yisrael, and innocent people everywhere, especially the military Eretz Yisrael and the American military and anyone else that will participate in this battle against evil. So, to organize the questions, as I said, Purim and Persia, then and now, let's begin with a few introductions that really can set the tone to help us place things into context. As I said, obviously the first thing you have to address is the immediate issues, the safety of people, the battles against the enemies. But when you step back, you realize there's a bigger story here. And that's actually what Purim is all about. That's the first lesson you can learn from Purim. Purim is a holiday that connects dots. So besides, obviously, the connection to the region, the geographic region, and other similarities, which we'll discuss, the first thing that jumps out at us all is the fact, the connecting of dots. The story of Purim took around 9 years to unfold. 9 years. When we look back, we have the story in the Megillah, so it's compact, and the main points and highlights are told to us and milestones, so we have the full story. But if you were living through it, it was around 9 years. And everything seems so random. If you lived through it, you wouldn't even realize what was going on. Happens to be, there was a king called Achashverosh. And he was a melech, he was a king over 127 lands in the Persian Empire. And he happened to throw a party. I say happen intentionally. And he happened to invite his wife Vashti, and she refused. He happened to have her killed. Then he happened to be looking for a new queen, and it happened to be Esther, who at the time no one knew who she was. Mordechai happened to be over here, a plot against the king, and he was able to foil that plot to assassinate King Achashverosh. And then it continues the story that Mordechai happens to be appointed by the king Achashverosh as well as Haman. And then comes the plot of Haman, to kill all men, women, and children. And he convinces Achashverosh, and he's incited in general, but specifically what really instigates him is Mordechai lo yichra v'lo yishtachva. He refuses to bow to Haman. Everyone else bowed to him. And it happens to be that the king has insomnia one night. He can't sleep. And it happens to be they read to him from Divrei Hayomim, from the stories and the story of the plot that Mordechai foiled the assassination attempt against the king. And Haman happened to be out in the courtyard, and the king calls him in. How would you reward a man that saved the king's life? And he thought he's talking about him, about Haman. Little did he know it was Mordechai. And then he tells him, go do everything you just said for Mordechai. So Haman happens to be the one that's leading Mordechai through the streets and honoring him. And then as the story continues, Esther happens to be the queen. So she's the one that beseeches the king, and finally everything gets turned around. The Leich Knes Kol HaYehudim and the prayers and the children and everything, Haman ends up being hung on the very gallows that he built for Mordechai. And then the king creates a second decree to eliminate the first one, to kill all the enemies. Everything gets reversed. And suddenly you look 9 years later, hey, the entire conspiracy against the Jews of a Holocaust was completely transformed. But these are all dots. At the time, if you were following it, you wouldn't necessarily see. If you were reading the news, everything was a separate story. You look back and you see, wow, you see the hand of God. But it's a hand of God, what Chassidus calls a nes melubish b'teva. You don't see it obvious. It's not the parting of the sea. You don't see miracles in the revealed way. It's the greatest miracle of all, invisible hand. You connect the dots, you immediately see. So the first lesson we learn from Purim is connect the dots. That events that are happening in our lives, even though we're living through them and we sometimes don't notice, we don't see the forest from the trees. Or they say we don't see the trees from the forest, is the expression. We don't see the bird's eye view. Because we're living in the moment. So the first lesson, Purim, step back, look back. Purim also tells us connect the dots of history. Not just the dots of the events during your time, the dots of 2,400 years of history. That there was once a country called Persia, Poras. And there was a Gzeira against Yidden. A man called Haman from Amalek, Haman Agogi. And Ayomi Me'el and the Skonim Vanasim, as the Megillah says. And these are days, remember, and they're recreated in your time. By Yomim Mahem Bizman Hazeh. In those days and today. Connect it all. And you'll begin to see a whole new picture emerge. The picture of what's happening today. If you go even further back, connect more dots. Poras didn't begin with Achashverosh. Poras already goes back to the beginning of time. Nahar Pros, Euphrates River. Nahar, and the other three rivers, all in Gan Eden, they're all in that same region, the Persian Gulf area. Today, modern day Iran, modern day Iraq, Bovel. So the history goes back years and years, thousands of years. And always confrontations. Always confrontations. And so you look at the texts, first of all in the Torah Shabbat, in the written Torah, then Torah Shabbat Peh, the story of Purim, that it's all pieces, all meant to lead toward what? Like Purim, to a Geula, the Geula of Purim. Purim was a Kata Abd, the Achashverosh Hanan, that still was not the Geula Mitzvah Vashlema. But today, according to the Medrashim and Maimoreh Chazal, we know that the end of days will be confrontation with Poras, between Poras and Remi actually. Remi is who? Magdiel Zu Remi, he's the grandson of Esav. So now we have Esav in the picture. Remi, Rome. Rome is the father of the Western world that would become the Christian world, the Roman world. Poras, different ways you explain Poras, whether it's from Yafas or Poras connected to Yishmael. Obviously, Sancherev, Bilbul, and confused the whole population of the world. But that region is a biblical region. And the end of days will be confrontations with that part of the world, with Yishmael in general and Poras specifically. And the end of the story, we're told clearly, like with the story of Purim, it will lead to Geula. Even though there are setbacks and there are challenges and there have been difficulties, look over the years. So we are at the threshold of Geula. And the Rebbe said this actually in Tavshinun Aleph, the Persian Gulf War. Iran was involved to some extent, but primarily Iraq. But the same idea, and brought the famous Yalkut Shmeini, Yamid Melech Poras. The king of Persian king will rise, a leader, and will terrorize the world and terrorize, including Muslim countries, Yishmael countries, Arab countries. And the world will yell and scream, what's happening? They'll be terrified. The Yidden will come and say, we're afraid. Everyone's afraid. And the Eibishter will then say, don't be afraid, my children. Kol Shasisi, everything I did was b'shvilchem. I did it for you. Higia zman gulaschem. The time of your Geula has come. So in the overall picture, what is the story? Yes, it's the confrontations that started in the time of Avram Avinu. And when you look in Avram's, the Bris Ben Absarim, and the vision that Hashem shows him, he shows him all these empires. The empire of Mitzrayim, for sure, he says that explicitly. And then the Pasuk, the Chashecha, and the Chareda, and the Nofla. If you look in all the Midrashim, and the commentaries there, look in Targum Yenis Ben Azil, and other commentaries, they all talk about that. It refers to the different empires, including Poras. One of them is Poras Amodai, Poras, specifically spelled out. And at the end, these empires who will terrorize the Yidden, like it was in the time of Haman, will ultimately be vanquished and conquered, and Mashiach will come. We'll talk more about it as we go along, but I wanted to first talk about connecting the dots. So the story of Purim is the story of then and story of today. Maybe different character names, but look, Haman and Khamenei, same letters even. Calling for the same thing, destruction, annihilation of Ali Yidden, Rahman al-Islam. Anoshim Noshim V'taf. And then comes the time where it turns around. So the Hashgacha, the divine providence, and as Prime Minister Netanyahu pointed out in his talk when he announced the operation, that like Purim, just like it fell then on Haman, now it's falling on Khamenei and falling on Iran as a sworn enemy. And they declared war against Israel. Israel never declared war on Iran. If you go back in 1979, when the Ayatollah Khomeini took over, right away they called Israel the little Satan, America the great Satan, the big Satan. So this is a long time coming. Halavai, we could have dealt with it in a peaceful way, but it didn't work that way. So now the key is to finish it, just like Purim, and it should be Napachu, La'Yehudim Eiseiru V'Simcha V'Sasim Yekar, celebration by Yidden, and B'Meili, celebration by all good people in this world. Because when you terrorize one group of people, the Jews, you end up terrorizing everyone. Because it's a threat to the world. So what lessons can we learn from Purim about today's events in Iran? I just spelled out the connecting of the dots, that the challenges are not new, that doesn't make them less. Like we'll say in the Haggadah, but Hashem is with us. And together with B'derech HaTeva, what we do with the blessings we've had from Hashem, militarily, strategically, and so on, and the support of the United States, etc., we will win this battle just as we won the battle in Purim. And it will be v'napech, not just win and finished, but it will be transformed into joy and celebration. Another thing we learn, of course, is what do they want from the Yidden? What did Haman want? He says, Yeshna am echad mefuzim mefeilet ben ha'amim. He says, there's this one singular nation, and they're spread, dispersed among all your nations of your empire. V'deseim shenis mekolam. And their faith, their religion, their beliefs, their values are different. Bothered him. They were not conforming. They were not bowing to him. This was more bothered. This bothered Hitler and bothered Iran. And their Ayatollahs and their people. Even though there may be differences, and there are. But at the end of the day, the Jewish people bother them. And above all, the reason is because the Yidden represent the Amma Nivcher, the Eibishter chose them, and whether it's jealousy or resentment or a distorted view of B'chlal, what Avraham Avinu, Av HaMoin Goyim wants from all his children and grandchildren. Bottom line is that instead of seeing Yidden as a source of bracha v'avorchem avarechecha, those that bless the Yidden will be blessed, and live not just in peace, but you can thrive. The Abraham Accords is a little taste of it. You can thrive culturally, financially, economically, in so many ways, even spiritually. Because that's the ultimate goal. The ultimate battle is a spiritual one. Let's be honest. Why are these Ayatollahs so against Israel? Because they see it as a threat to their perspective, to their theology. That's why they identify the big Satan, the small Satan, the Crusader Zionist conspiracy. As I've discussed a number of times, they have not be able to integrate God with coexistence. Avraham Avinu taught Yishmael how to do that, taught Yitzchak how to do it. Yitzchak, Yaakov, Tiferes learned to balance. It took the Christians many years for them to learn some balance, to create a country like the United States, a haven, a compassionate country that embraces the principles all men are created equal. In the first place, we see it in how they treat Jews. Institutionally, I'm not talking about individual anti-Semitism now. So the Muslim world has to become tamed as well, to discover, not Pero Odom, Yode Bakel V'yad Kol Boy, like the pasuk says about Yishmael. And like the Medrash says, Yishmael from the word Yishmakel, because at the end of days, the world will cry out, Yishmakel, and God will hear the cries of what Yishmael is doing to the people, attacking the world. But then will be the resolution, the peace that will come after the battles. So these are just some of the lessons we learn from Purim upon today's events in Iran, Persia, Hayomim Ha'ela, and Niskanim V'Nasim. And this actually is indicated in a Gemara, a Psak Halacha, where it says, Akeida Megillah Mafreya, someone that reads the Megillah backwards, Lo Yotza. He will not be Yetzah. So someone asks the question, why would anyone think of reading the Megillah backwards? When halacha says we're not allowed to read the Megillah, why does it think somebody would try to do so? It wouldn't make logical sense. It would only make sense to read the story of the Titanic backwards, because then the story would be about a magical boat that rises up from the bottom of the ocean and rescues a bunch of drowning people and brings them safely to Southampton. So there would be a happy ending. But why would someone read the Megillah backwards? It would make no logical sense. Not really sure your example. But okay, so be it. So it's a very good question. Obviously, in Halacha and the Gemara, they talk about every hypothetical. So there's a Torah of the Baal Shem Tov. The Torah of the Baal Shem Tov. That he says, Akedah Megillah Mafreya means if you read the story of the Megillah like it happened backwards, meaning that could happen in the past. Mafreya. It's a story from Amol. Nishtaint. Amol. Lo Yotza. No. Hayom Ha'ela Niskanim V'Nasim, like the Ramah says. Niskanim, not just remember, but Nasim, it's recreated now, like Kol Yem Yiyu Beinecha Chadoshim, like it's happening now. So the Rebbe Tov Shalom Edvov, 50 years ago, Purim, asked the question. Now, all Pirushim have to be shtim with one another. They have to be consistent. What does the Baal Shem Tov Pirush have to do with the Pshat? The Pshat talks about reading it backwards, push it from the last posuk backwards, instead of frontwards. And the Rebbe's answer is both poshet and brilliant. That it's exactly the same thing. Baal Shem Tov is saying, when you read it as if it's a story from Amol, then you read it backwards. The last events happened closest to us. And then the earlier events happened farther from us. But if you read it like it's happening now, then you read it frontwards. You're reading like Vahi b'mei Achashverosh is the beginning of the story. Not just then, today as well. And then all the psukim afterwards, everything is unfolding as we speak, like it's today. And we see it now, mamish b'einei basar, with our own flesh. We see the mamish in Persia, days before Purim, Yud Aleph Adar, Zachras asher asa lecha Amalek. We know what Amalek wanted. And now it's replaying itself. So this means reading the Megillah the way you're supposed to read it, both frontwards, but also more importantly, as if it's happening now. Okay. What are the parallels between ancient and modern day Persia? So we've talked about some of them. First of all, the very location. Mordechai and Esther are buried in Iran. We know where. And cities like Shushan and others are existing cities. And it was called Poras. It was exactly in the Megillah. You have the name Poras, Persia. The parallels of Haman and what he wanted with what Iran has been declaring since 1979 is very clear. Lahashmid lahadik. To annihilate all the Jews. The names Khomeini, now Khamenei, and Haman, again, another parallel. Like someone writes, according to the ancient Persian pronunciation, Haman's name would be said Khamenei. That sounds a lot like the name of the modern day Haman, Khamenei in Iran. And not a coincidence, correct. And then, of course, comes the events that are happening. Is it providential, someone writes, that Khamenei and his cohorts were wiped out while we were reading the Torah portion about obliterating Amalek? Mochitim chezecher Amalek. The answer is absolutely not, of course. That's the ultimate example, the ultimate of reliving something. Again, we prefer it wouldn't have happened. But we have to deal with a person who just refuses to communicate and refuses to negotiate. So that's what was done. And now the goal is to bring light to the whole world, including to Iran. Okay. And there are more parallels. That's why it's not a surprise when you look in the Gemara in Avodah Zarah, right in the beginning, Daf Beis Amud Beis, when it talks about the different nations as they'll be judged in the future. So the Gemara talks about primarily Rome and Persia and Paras. And the Gemara actually asks, why these two? Why are these spelled out and not the others? Because they said these were the two chashav, the two main countries. Even back then, and now when you think of it, Persia, Iran, creating such upheaval and chaos over the last few decades, and the United States and the Western world, Rome. To the point where Tosfos brings there, that says that both of them will, the Gemara says, they both will last till Mashiach comes. Ask Tosfos, Daf Beis Amud Beis, in Avodah Zarah. What do you mean? It says in Yuma and other places that at the end, Rome will conquer Paras. So Paras won't go all the way. So he says that's right before Mashiach's coming. But throughout history, both these forces will be out there. A lot can be said on that. But that all leads to, builds the story that we're discussing here. And when you go, I mentioned Targum Yonasan ben Uziel and Lech Lecha on the Bris Ben Absarim. You go to Abarbanel and Yeshaya Memhei. Tosfos Marsha rather in Yuma. Yuma is Daf Yud Amud Aleph. And there's more. We've talked about this as well, especially after 9/11. And then different times that confrontations took place in that region. The Persian Gulf War and Tafshinun Aleph. I mentioned the Yalkut Shmeni before. But also the Zoyar, Seif Parsha Ve'era, and the Zoyar Seif Parsha Balak, which the Rebbe actually zeichens in a note that he wrote to Rabbi Greenglass, that at the end of days, there'll be confrontations with the Arab Muslim world. So even though Iran is not officially Arab, it's Muslim, but not Arab, but it's still that region. And there'll be the end will be confrontations. And then will be Yisrael Esachoyel, Mashiach will come. All the same story. But remember, it goes all the way back to the time of Avram Avinu. And furthermore, if you think about it, Matan Torah, what happens by Matan Torah? The Eibishter also machziron HaTorah, like the Gemara says and the Medrash says. The Eibishter offered the Torah to who? To Bnei Yishmael and to Bnei Esav. Back again, Rome, later become the Muslim Arab world. Why do you offer them the Torah? Because these are children and grandchildren of Avram Avinu. So different explanations are given why the Eibishter offered it when they didn't accept it. And one of them is based on the Zoyar. The Tzemach Tzedek brings in Eira Torah Parsha Bracha. He talks about Seir. So he says there that it's a Hagdome to Oz Epech El Amim Sofa Berura. The Eibishter offered them the Torah because he's preparing them with the Sheva Mitzvahs Bnei Neach. That time when the nations will be transformed and serve God. So it's all a preparation. And then you throw in the Rambam as well, that was censored by censors of the Rambam. Today we have the full text. Ironically, it's in Fusremi, you have the full text. In Fusremi, in the Rome edition, where he says clearly that with all the flaws, bottom line is why the Eibishter was Mesab of Sibas, the mystery of the spread of Christianity and Islam, is liyashar derech, to pave the way for Mashiach, for belief in Mashiach, even in the farthest outskirts and the islands of the world. The belief in God's unity, the belief in Mashiach. So all this is part of the dots. When you think about it, that's what's all leading to. That ultimately all the nations of the world will embrace in the spirit of how Avram Avinu, Av Hamoin Goyim taught. Okay, continuing on. So someone asked a question now, because the plot thickens, as you'll see. What happened on Purim, Tafshin Yud Gimel, 1953, when the Rebbe led the Chassidim in shouting, "Hurrah, hurrah," 3 times, and his connection to Stalin's death that night. And how does that apply to our times? So here's another fascinating piece in the connecting of the dots. So Tafshin Gimel was Fabrengen Purim. The Rebbe said a Maimer, as usual. But then at the end of the Fabrengen ended at 5 a.m. Around 4 a.m., the Rebbe told a story. He told a story that there was the time of the Rebbe Rashab, that there was a chassid, that there was a new leader was elected, or whatever, rose to power in the Soviet Union or in Russia. And though he didn't want to, but the crowd was all yelling, "Hoorah, hoorah," which means like hooray, hooray, cheering on the new leader. This chassid was not interested in doing that, but since everybody was yelling and it could be dangerous, so he also yelled, "Hoorah, hoorah." In Hebrew, hoorah means who? He is a ra, he's evil. The Rebbe told the story. And then when he told the story, he said, "Hoorah!" And he took his hands and made like a triangle 3 times. "Hoorah! Hoorah! Hoorah!" And the crowd in the Elam, in the Fabrengen, started saying it together with the Rebbe. And the Rebbe did it 3 times 3. 3 times to the right, 3 times to the center, 3 times to the left. Hoorah! And he did like, "Hoorah! Hoorah!" There's a pictures actually of it. Then afterwards the Rebbe smiled. He was like a very Purim Dika spirit. But then the Rebbe became very serious. And he leaned on his chair and his arm. And he said another maimer. Al Kain Koru, Yom Mele. Why? The pasuk that says that's why these days are called Kain Koru Yom Mele Purim. Al Shem HaPur. The Pur is the lottery that Haman threw. A second maimer, which is till that point the Rebbe only said. There were later the Rebbe would say sometimes 2, 3, very rare, however. Okay, the story's not over. As I said, the Fabrengen ended at 5 a.m. A few days later, we find out Stalin, the Haman Harosha, Seder HaYehudim, in the Soviet Union, died. He had a stroke. But he didn't. But they found out, they announced his death 3 days after Purim. When did he die? That night. Purim night. Whether it's exactly the time that they said, "Hurrah, hurrah," I'm not sure, but that was then. Okay. Now this Maimer was a Bilti Muga. The Rebbe didn't edit the Maimer at the time. Years later in Tafshinun Aleph, for Purim, this Maimer was presented to the Rebbe, and the Rebbe edited it. And the introduction to the Maimer, they wrote this story that the Rebbe told the story, and it was connected. Chassidim connected it to the events that happened at Seder HaYehudim, the hater of Jews in that country. Now he was then plotting to send doctors, a whole doctor's plot, basically real gzeira against Yidden, and it was all foiled, obviously. Mamish like the story of Haman. So there you have yet another connection. How does it apply to our times? So someone asked the connection, okay, based on this story, how this put an end to Stalin and his evil decrees, can we all say hurrah, hurrah now to try to put an end to Khamenei and the terrorism he sponsors? Well, he's already been finished. But yes, why not? We can learn from that lesson. An interesting footnote I would add is that Purim, 1953, was March 1st. When is March 1st? Today. Today is March 1st. Just as an interesting aside. Okay. The next person asked a question following up with that. What was the general theme of the Maimer that Rebbe delivered then? It'd be interesting. What's the Maimer itself talk about? Can we ask Rabbi Jacobson to give a short synopsis of the Purim Maimer Al Kain Koru Tafshin Yud Gimel 5713? And then the person says, I have a specific question in the Maimer. So I'll address that in a moment. Let me just give the summary. So the Rebbe begins, Al Kain Koru, why is it called Purim? Purim. So the Rebbe asks a question, what kind of name is that? The Purim, the miracle of Purim, is the nest that the Jews were saved. The Pur is incidental. That's the month that it all came out on it came out. And the truth is, the Pur actually was what Haman threw the lots for the negative. He was looking for a month to kill the Jews, God forbid. So why would we call it Al Kain Karu Yom Mela on the Purim? Clearly, the name Purim captures the essence of Purim. The Rebbe goes on to explain that that's Taka Purim. Purim is the essence of Purim is Geirel. Lots. It's about Hamshacha from a place that's higher than Seichel and Tam Vadas. When you logically figure something out, you don't need to throw a lottery. Lots means you're going and submitting yourself to something that's not based on logic. Even if it's something that doesn't make sense, if the lot falls out, that's what you do. And the Rebbe discusses the parallels between Purim and Yom Kippurim, which is also called Kippurim. We also throw a geirel for the Shnei Seirim, for the two offerings, one that becomes a Seir LaAzazel, one that's brought as an offering. It's also through a geirel, because both Purim and Yom Kippur is Amshacha higher than Seder Ishtalshus. And then he goes on to say, and that's what Haman was looking for. He was looking higher for Seder Ishtalshus because he knew in Seder Ishtalshus was going to be very difficult to attack the Jews. So he was looking for a power beyond Ishtalshus, where Chashecha Ke'era and the Makif, darkness and light are equal. He thought that he could smuggle his way through there. But the truth is that Purim really is even in the level that's the Ma'alim Etam Vadas, not just where it makes sense. Yidden also, Eyev Yaakov. That's Esav Sanasi. I feel where it's Ach Esav the Yaakov, where there is an equality. Even there, the Bechira is Dafke in Yidden. So it's through the Mesidus Nefesh that Yidden showed that acts as that level, and therefore that's where the Hatzalah came from. So Haman was not successful. Not just besides Ishtalshus, but L'mayla Mishtalshus. And then he concludes that that was the transformation, that Haman was hung on the very gallows that he built for Mordechai. So if you think about it, the Teichen is the transformation of the opposite, though the Rebbe doesn't say it explicitly, but the destruction of Stalin, who died that night. Okay, so the question the person is asking, I have a specific question on the Maimer. If the Maimer implies that Haman knew he couldn't cause harm to us within the natural order, meaning say the Ishtalshlus, so he had to tap into the energy of casting lots, which is an energy above intellect, then why did Haman ultimately fail? Because he ultimately failed because the Eibishter's connection to us is not just based on Seichel, not just because we're behaving well, and the Eibishter loves us for our behavior. It's because there's an Atzmus, the connection, it's at B'chiras Atzmus. Even the place in Atzmus that's higher than structure and higher than benefit or lack of benefit, the place of Geirel, and even deeper than Geirel, as the Rebbe explains. That's why Haman is. So Haman thought he can go there and there find an equalizer, and therefore he can say, no, the Yidden are not necessarily special. But he didn't realize that, no, they're even more special because it's coming Matzad B'chira, not Matzad their particular milas, as the Rebbe elaborates. Okay. Another question, continuing with that Maimer, since we're talking about that Maimer, Tovshin Yud Gimel, says like this now. Let me see. So someone asks, can we ask, in the Maimer Al Kain Koru, it says Haman shows the energy of lottery, a randomness that transcends Seder Ishtalshus, like we just discussed. Because he knew within our structures it's impossible to destroy the Jews. But if it says in other places that if you save one's life, it's as if you save the entire world, then every Jew is the entire world. So how is it possible that during the Holocaust, the world was destroyed 6 million times? How is Hamas able to destroy 1,200 worlds on October 7th if we have divine protection within our structures? Okay, so he's asking the question the other way around. In other words, if our enemies cannot hurt us within the structure of nature, how do we explain tragedies that we suffered throughout history? Well, Chmon el Islam, because of Golos, even though there's the Bechira in Eden, and it proved itself during the time of Haman, and we always can access it, but we don't know God's mysterious ways. It's like saying, if Purim happened, why weren't all the Yidden saved during the Holocaust or other times? That's part of the mysteries, part of the things we don't have answers for. And that's why we cry out. So the story of Purim is a story of hope because the end of the story is a good one. And we always hope for that. And now we see it playing itself out, thank God. But you could also ask, there were some people killed just today. Yesterday as well. Because we don't know God's mysterious ways. Obviously, the connection is there, on the deepest level of Bechira, like we said, but Golus is Fard Golus. And that's going to lead us into the next few questions regarding Purim. Because even after Purim, it wasn't like Purim every time. We've had plenty of tzaras that were not resolved, that when there was no Hatzola, Begoli at least. La'osid Lave will all be redeemed. Eit Hashem can after be. But the fact is, like I said, the Holocaust and other times, some that you mentioned. So he says like this. I'll just go about it with a few other questions and we'll get back to this in a moment. So what is the central message of Purim? So there's many central messages. One of them we discussed, well, more than one. We've discussed several of them, connecting the dots. The Amunah la'ichra v'la'yishtachave. Always having the Amunah and B'tachan, and we will prevail. There's other lessons as well. And central themes. B'sidus Nefesh. The Gemara says it's the conclusion of Matan Torah. Kimu v'kibla Yehudim, because now they accepted the Torah. But it's saying it because Mekan Modoil Rabbe Laraisa, says the Gemara in Shabbos. But by Purim they accepted it without Kof Aleim Hargikigas. They weren't compelled. So now it's Berotzen Kibla Aleim. And many other lessons. But it also includes the lesson of Purim, is also the lesson of Golus and Geula. So that leads us to the next question. How do we reconcile? Well, I'll go about it two different ways. We'll start like this. If the guardian of Israel does not slumber or sleep, why does it say that the king's sleep was disturbed that night? If we said, Lo Yonah v'lo Yishan Shem Yisrael, and that's what brought Purim, obviously Purim came and the Eibishter did prevail and saved the Yidden. So why does it say, B'laylahu nodat hashnas HaMelech? And we know Melech goes on Achashverosh, which includes Achriz V'reishes Shalei, includes Melech Malchem Lochem HaKadosh Baruch Hu. What do you mean, not Shnas HaMelech? What kind of Shnas HaMelech? And we have the Maimorim, the Rebbe's famous Maimer Tov Shin Chof and Tov Shin Chof Hei on that posuk. That there's also the massive of Shchinte Begalusa, unfortunately. And that's where there's Aniyah Shena Begalusa. There's the element of Shchinte Begalusa, the Shechina is tak in Golus, and Golus is like a Shina, is like sleep. What is sleep? That the Giluyim, you don't see Giluyim. It's the Sena Le'inu. And that's Balayla U Nodada Shnas HaMelech, that there was the Shnas HaMelech, but then came the Nodada, an awakening. And that's when the Eibishter comes the Giluyim. Now, of course, the Eibishter is always there with us. Ime Anechi B'tzara. But just like Mitzrayim, it didn't happen right away. There needs to be different steps. Sometimes we understand them, sometimes we don't. And that's why, answering the question, is God's name ever mentioned in the Megillah? And that's the why Hashem's name is not mentioned in the Megillah. Because it's concealed. Even the Nes of Purim, it happens in a concealed way. With all the milas of it, but it's concealed. But especially in the early stages, when the Gzeira was there, it was Shnas HaMelech, it was sleep. And then came the Gilui of Lo Yonah v'lo Yishan Shem Yisrael. So what do you know from this? What we take away from this is that there is a Helen Hester. And we need to overcome that. Purim does not negate that fact. Akata Avda Achashverosh means that even now, we continue to be in Golus. there wouldn't be all this war that we're having with Iran right now if there was no, if it was complete Gili and Gula Mitis Vashlema. So we have two elements here. That even though it's concealed, but beneath the surface, the Melech is awake. And not just beneath the surface, then it bursts through, and you have the Geula of Purim that shines through. So then the question that someone asked, why is Golus, exile, compared to sleep and dreams? Sleep, because that's exactly what Golus is. A person is alive when they're asleep, but you don't see Giluim, you don't see the faculties fully at work. And they dream contradictions. Dream is a state of awareness, but it's not cognitive awareness in the full sense of the word. What does it mean in Ruchnius? It's a state of a comatose state, like a dark state. Bayemahu, balayla hahu. Like bayemahu, haster aster ponai. Hahu, it's concealed. It's not ato, it's not zeh, it's not gili. That's one end of it. But then there's the balayla hahu nodad toshnas hamelach. In that very darkness is the nodada. And that's through the Mesiris Nefesh Avid, as the Rebbe explains in the Tovshin Chofmaimer, Purim again, where he talks about Kel Deidi Defik, Rayosi, Tumosi, all the different Lushenis, as the Rebbe explains, are all the Kel Deidi, the voice of my beloved, is knocking on the door to wake up the Ani Yeshena. It says, Ani Yeshena, Li Be'er. I'm awake. Yidden are awake, are asleep in Golus, but then Libi Eir, but my heart's awake. And that in turn creates that Libi, Kimayim Aponim Leponim, Kain Leva Adam La'adam, that the Lev Lamaila of the divine gets also awakened. So that explains the Samat paradox. On one hand, you don't see Hashem's name revealed. Someone asks the question, you say Hashem's name is not revealed, don't we see there are Maimorim that say the reason Hashem's name is not mentioned in the Megillah is because the revelations on Purim are from such a lofty place, it's above Hashem's name. Correct. Etzem. But how do we reconcile that with other teachings that say every time it says HaMelech in the Megillah, it's really referring to Hashem? Like I said, Melech HaChashverosh. But that's a remez. That's not Begoli. That's a remez. Hashem's name, Hakfaya, Yud Kei Vav Kei, is not mentioned. There is an element in HaMelech that hides a deeper, but it's hidden. And it has to be revealed, as we've been discussing here. So this answers a whole bunch of other questions that I'm going to address right now. How do we reconcile the Megillah stating the sleep of the king was disturbed and the commentaries that explain the king refers to Hashem with the pasuk that says the guardian of Israel never slumbers or sleeps? So we answered that question. But now comes also another question, the Adalayada question. Why would we be obligated? It says, Chayiv Adam Lipsuma. Chayiv Inish Lipsuma. A person is responsible, Lipsuma, to drink. Adla Yoda ben Baruch Mordechai and Order Haman. Why would one be obligated to reach a point where you can't distinguish between blessed is Mordechai and cursed is Haman? And the answer is this, because you're reaching a place in Geidel that's the Mailam of the Cheshbenis. Mordechai is a mile over Haman for sure. Mordechai is a tzaddik, Haman's a Rasha. Mordechai is a bracha, blessing. Haman is Order Haman. But Purim reaches a deeper level than that, even in the Etzem. And that's where you have to reach Adaliyada, not because there's an equal between them. You're reaching a place, and even in that place is also as Yaakov, as Yaakov, Ahafti as Yaakov, as Esav Sanasi. That even there, God chooses Mordechai. Even in the Atzmizdika level of Adaliyada. So now, we'll also address another question or two. So the answers the question we just said. What's the purpose of drinking alcohol until one says, cursed is Mordechai and blessed is Haman? That seems to be the exact opposite of what we want to accomplish on Purim. Can you imagine if someone walked into 770 and said, cursed is our big rabbi and blessed is Al Sharpton, the Havdil? That would be laughed out of the building or worse. So what's going on here? So that answers the question. We're not talking about equalizing them. We're talking about reaching a level that's beyond the structure. Okay. Just looking at all the questions that came in, trying to keep a little order here. How do we explain that no miracles happened on Purim and everything happened within the laws of nature? Okay, but it all started with Haman casting lots, which is an act above logic and the structures of nature, and Hashem saving us with an energy and revelation higher than Ratzon, which is above the structures of nature. That's all from the Maimer al-Kein Koru from Tovshin Yud Gimel. So we answered the question essentially. Everything originates in Purim from Pur, the Geirel. But obviously, that itself, that it's a Geirel, not a structure. In a structure, you have Giluyim, very high levels of Giluyim. That itself is revealed Dafka in Helam. Dafka, the concealment, where you don't see the difference between the levels. That's what accesses the highest level of a Hahu in the Etzem that's higher than all the Giluyim. And therefore, that's how the reconciliation goes. Purim is both extremes. On one hand, it's concealed. On the other hand, that itself is Megala level that's completely beyond structure. In Pesach, you don't say that. Pesach is Giluyim. Nigla le melech malcham lochem HaKadosh Baruch Hu v'golam. And all the other statements that express that idea. Okay. How do we access the transcendent power of Purim today? So that's when we go with Aveda Lamayla Mitam Badas, Mesiras Nefesh. Here, let's get back to the Parsha where we're dealing with now. We're dealing with challenges. It's very easy to become frustrated, to become depressed. You see especially setbacks. But just like by Purim, Lech Knes Kol HaYehudim, gather all the Yidden, and stand strong with Amunah, Lo Yichra V'Lo Yishtachve, do not bow. Stand strong, and then that Mesiras Nefesh that you didn't have, that itself draws down the highest levels of Geirel, and even higher, the Bechira of the Eibishter, Nid. That's how you draw down the transcendence, and that's the lesson. So practically speaking, Achdus in Purim is critical. Let's do everything possible to the point of Mesiras Nefesh, like the Rebbe would always say, Sinas Chinam destroyed the Beis HaMikdash, Avas Chinam. Baseless hatred, so do unconditional love, not super rational love. Unite, connect with people, even though you have all the cheshbenis, maybe there's a reason not to. You have a feud with someone or disagreement. Now's the time to go out of your own hagbolas. You go out of your hagbolas, the Eibishter goes out of his hagbolas, kavyachol, and draws down this level of etzem and helps us win the war, finish it up, in a peaceful way, with no more pain and no more agmas nefesh and aggravation. That's how we do it. So with that, let us move to another statement around Purim. And let me just make sure I'm covering everything here. Okay, before we go there, let me just say this. Purim is named after drawing lots because drawing lots tunes into divine energy above our structures. And it's that energy that transcends intellect and structure that was able to save us from Haman's evil plot. My question for Rabbi Jacobson is, in addition to Purim, how can we access this level of divine energy that is above structures when we have problems that the energy within structures doesn't have the power to help resolve? For example, if someone has an illness that modern science and medicine doesn't yet have a treatment for, how can the person access energies higher than structure to help cure the illness? Or if someone has a financial emergency because a boiler broke and will cost $5,000 to fix and he needs money quickly in a miraculous way with an energy above structure to help solve the problem and get the heat working again. What are practical ways and things we can do to access this above structure transcendent energy to help solve serious problems? So I repeat what I just said before. With the measure that you bring to the table, that's how you're going to be measured. You go out of your comfort zone, then the levels of Elikus will go out of their comfort zone. You smile, Hashem smiles back. You go with the more limited, you get more limited. Obviously, the Eibishter could always have Rachmanis and do all kinds of things by grace. So the key to everything, and that's what Purim teaches us, you have to go out of your Hagbolas, out of your structure, out of your rational logic. The very fact that you feel down or you feel doesn't make sense, I don't know how I'm going to get out of this, you have to get beyond that and say, you know what, I'm going to be B'simcha anyway, it's Purim. The Eibishter is with us. For thousands of years, He's helped us no matter what situation. That itself opens up channels. Similar to what the Rebbe said about Sinedus. Someone, the Frierdiker Rebbe once asked someone for a donation to publish books, and he said he doesn't have the money. So the Frierdiker Rebbe said that when you make a achlata, the Eibishter then opens up the channels that will give you the money. And that's what happened. He didn't have the money. Al Pitava didn't sound possible. Same thing here. When you open up the channels in your own psyche, in your own attitude, that in turn will actually have those channels opened, and you'll be able to accomplish it. So it's a little like a lechatchila riber approach, which of course is Purim dik. That's the response. So with that, let's go to another question that was asked in that spirit. Two questions for the rabbi. Why are the victories of Purim referred to as miraculous when it's taught that the story took place within the natural course of events over a 7 or 8 or 9 year period, and there were no supernatural miracles involved like splitting the Red Sea? That's the first question. The answer is because miracles can happen in a revealed way. It could be a miracle that's mislabish, that manifests and enclosed in laws of nature. That doesn't make it less of a miracle. You can go even further. The Baal Shem Tov says that even nature is miracle. It's only a bunch of miracles that is based on basically its frequency. Is breathing a miracle or a natural thing? If a person, one breath, it would be a miracle. Since it happens all the time, we take it for granted. The sun rises every morning, we don't see the miracle in it. But we don't recognize the miracles that are happening. So Purim is telling us there's a miracle if you look a little deeper. Second question, why does Chazal say that the era of Mordechai and Esther was the last era of miracles, when just a few hundred years later was the miracle of Hanukkah, of the oil lasting 8 days? And in our times, the Rebbe said during the Gulf War, when Saddam Hussein launched missiles at Israel, that it was miracles that saved Israel from widespread damage. So that's a question you can ask in general. There have been many miracles after the story of Purim, after the story of Hanukkah. The Gemara there is not exactly, it's just like it says about Nevuah. The Nevuah ended, but that doesn't mean there aren't exceptions, number one. Number two, miracles have different levels of miracles. So Purim was a particular type of level of miracle. I don't want to go now into the details of it, but essentially miracles are happening all the time. Some are obvious, some are not so obvious. Some of the hidden ones are perhaps even greater than the ones that are obvious. That's the bottom line that we need to know. And we are having miracles right now. You don't even have to turn to anything back. Look at things that are happening right now. There are plenty of miracles. Okay. What is the meaning of the expression, anyone who stretches out their hand is given? So it's not just an expression, it's Chazal and Halacha. That on Purim, you don't make cheshbeinus when you're giving tzedakah. Kol ha'peshet yad neisim le. Everyone who extends their hand, you give. That's the simple meaning. Obviously, the deeper meaning is because Purim, all the channels are open. Besides Simcha Peres Geder, Simcha pierces and breaks through all boundaries, Purim is all about Adalayoda, going to levels that are beyond structure. So the first beginning is not making cheshbon. If someone comes to you, asks you, don't make a cheshbon, just give. That's what Purim is about. And that's how you will be treated as well. So someone asked the question, it's taught that everyone who reaches out their hand on Purim also refers to reaching out hand to Hashem. And yet, And Purim, therefore, is an opportune time for that. And yet, last year, Purim, I asked for abundant parnasa, and more specifically that since I've been at the same job for close to 10 years, I should get a promotion and a salary raise. But unfortunately, the opposite happened. And I was laid off from my job because business was slow. I found another job almost a month later, but I'm working longer hours and making less money than the previous job. But I have to still do it even though I don't like the situation. I have to stay at the job until a better opportunity comes along. My question is, what did I do wrong last Purim that not only did Hashem not answer me during an opportune time, as Purim promises, but the opposite happened and my situation got worse? And more importantly, what can I do differently this Purim when I reach out my hand and ask for better parnasa, that it should be ultimately lead to abundant parnasa and have Hashem answer me affirmatively? Okay. Well, again, we don't always know Hashem's mysterious ways. There may have been other blessings that you received. I'm sure there were other blessings that you received. So you have to learn how to appreciate. Why it didn't come exactly in the way parnasa? I can't answer that question. But the point is, Hashem heard your prayers, and it was Purim. Purim is coming again. You don't look what happened last year and say, I'm not going to do it again. Work harder. Ask harder. Kol ha-peshet yad. Maybe you have to open your hand to someone and help them one way or another. And maybe that'll open up more channels. We always forge ahead. We don't look back and say, since something didn't happen, I'm not going to do it again. No. Maybe Hashem Taka owes you one, and maybe if you put a little more effort, it could also be Hashem was testing you. Challenges in order for you to keep positive. There's many ways to explain it. The bottom line is, we always forge ahead. We always think positively. Trach gut wird sein gut. And this Purim will absolutely bring you blessings. Gashmis and Baruchnis. Not just you, but everyone listening. In abundance. Okay. And like in general, what can I do to ensure that these blessings are fulfilled in my life? You need to make the keli. You keep making a keli, and the Eibishter responds. Do you always see it immediately? We hope yes, but sometimes it takes time, sometimes it's revealed in different ways. What happened on Purim 60 years ago? This person also refers to that. Tovshei Chavav Purim, at the end of the Farbrengen, the Rebbe was machriz, kol ha-peshet yad neisnim le. Everyone who extends the hand, they'll be given. And that's what the Rebbe did. He began to give mashke to everyone who came over to him. Became such a bahola, such a mayhem and havoc. The Rebbe kept trying to make order. It didn't help much. And people came, everybody came. Even after the Farbrengen, the Rebbe continued going to his room. People kept coming and the Rebbe kept pouring. The Rebbe went to his car to go home. They jumped on the car even broke. They had to bring another car. Even at the Rebbe's house, before he was going into his house, he was still pouring people. So it was one of these Giluyim of Purim Tovshei Chavav. That goes down in history that people who were there. I don't remember it, to be honest, but I heard about it many times. It was historic. So there's no question that everything is a Purim Nimshachas, that I'm sure that Rebbe is going to do it this year, Purim as well. Beruchnius. We hope Begashmius Mamish. But regardless, for sure, something is coming from that Kedusha Le'zazim Im Kema. And that's how we have to look at Purim. Like the Rebbe pouring and pouring and pouring. Okay. Being that time is limited, I will wind down now and I will say the following. I'll conclude with this question. Well, two questions I'll conclude, which I think are very fitting now. Why does here we go. Why did we not take spoils in Persia as we did in Egypt? The Megillah Befedish praises the Jews that they didn't take spoils, booty. By Mitzrayim Befedish, yeah. They actually did take, they took. So it says, why does the Megillah praise us for not looting and taking spoils after we defeated Haman's militias that tried to genocide us? But the Torah says when we left Egypt, we did take their gold and silver. What's the difference between those two situations? Where in Egypt we took spoils, but in Persia we couldn't. So the answer, actually, I was reading the question, it came to me from something that Rebbe said back in Tov Shinun Aleph and Nun, that we already finished Avedus HaBerurim. And now we have to only open our eyes and receive the Giluyim. the reason of taking spoils, where it says where they left Mitzrayim, Erev Rav, they took the Reish Beis Netzutzes, 202 of the 288 sparks of Kedusha, the 288 sparks of Merachefes, Rapach Netzutze Kedusha, that fell from Toyu Shridas HaKelim, which in turn, as the Alter Rebbe explains, breaks down into many more sparks. So Mitzrayim was a birur. They were refining Mitzrayim and elevating part of the world, and then they would continue the birur ha'umis. I mentioned before, Bris Ben Absarim, the Golas Bovel, and Golas Poras, and Modai, and Golas Yavon, Golas Remi, Edem, and Golas Shishmal as well. That's a birur. And that's why they took out Chush Gadol, Yotz Achre Ken Yotz Ber Chush Gadol, Kimitsuda Shein by Dogim, etc., that the Chazal say. Vishaltem, they took these Netzutzes. That's what the Haveda was. Purim was not a Veda of Berurim. Purim was an Aveda, firstly protecting and defending against enemies, and then reaching a Dargah of Geidel that's L'mayla Mishtalshlus. So it was not about booty. It was not about taking the spoils. Today, you could say the same thing. The battles now are not about Birur Netzutzes. That's been finished. Now it's about Giluyim, getting the Gilui and revealing it in the world, and the Gula Amitis Vashlema. So that leads me to the final point in the question. Now that the world's biggest terrorist, Khamenei, is gone, what comes next? Is this a prelude to Mashiach? So I'll conclude where I began. Absolutely. All the Mamorei Chazal I brought before, from Yuma, from Avodah Zarah, the Tosfos, the Zohar, say Parsha Ve'era, say Parsha Bolok, the Targum Yenison Ben Uziel on Bris Ben Absarim, and the other commentaries there, and many, many more, all clearly indicate that the end Poras will fall and never rise again. It'll be transformed. That's the key. The transformation, together with all the nations of the world, in the Gula Amitis Vashlema. And here we are on the threshold, in the days Yemei Purim, with all the similarities. It's right before us. But I'll conclude again, the Eibusher should bless Hini Layonim V'Leishin Shem Yisrael to protect the Yidden. There shouldn't be Rachmana Litzlan any more casualties or hurt or deaths, definitely not. And we should finally be zeichet together with the Geula Amitis Vashlema, Mismach Geula Geula, from Geula's Purim straight into the Geula Amitis Vashlema, in the schus of our mitzvahs and Teira and the Achdus and everything else that we will do Purim, especially with Yefutza Meinesecha Chutza, where Mashiach promised Osimar do Malka Mashiach. Afreilichem Purim, we should only talk about positive things, Teva Nira V'Anigla and Simcha L'Maylam L'Kol Medida V'Akbola.